It was late afternoon when the call came through. I was working my usual shift as a detective in the Crimes Against Children unit, and by now, I had learned to recognize the tone of urgency in a dispatcher's voice. A woman called in, the dispatcher said. She claims her 7-year-old son has made some alarming accusations about her husband. You need to hear this. By the time I arrived at the address, the sun was starting to set, casting long shadows over the quiet suburban street. The house looked normal, 2 stories, a well-kept yard, a bicycle lying on its side in the driveway. It was the kind of place where you'd never expect something dark to be lurking. But appearances meant nothing in my line of work. The mother, Erin, answered the door. She was in her early 30s, with tired eyes and trembling hands. She ushered me inside quickly, glancing nervously toward the stairs. "My son Caleb is upstairs," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He doesn't want to come down right now." I nodded, glancing around the living room. It was spotless, almost unnervingly so, as if Erin had spent the entire day trying to clean away her anxiety. Family photos lined the walls, Erin smiling with Caleb, and a man I assumed was the stepfather, Jeff. "What did Caleb tell you?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. Erin swallowed hard, sitting down on the edge of the couch. She wrung her hands together, her wedding ring glinting in the dim light. "He said Jeff's been doing things," she said finally, her voice breaking. I sat down across from her, giving her time to compose herself. "Caleb's only 7, she continued. "He doesn't have the words to explain it fully, but he said Jeff comes into his room at night when I'm asleep. He said Jeff told him not to tell anyone, or something bad would happen." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she covered her face with her hands. I asked her to bring Caleb downstairs so I could speak to him. A few minutes later, she returned with a small boy clinging to her hand. Caleb was thin, with big brown eyes that darted around the room nervously. He wouldn't make eye contact, his gaze fixed on the floor as he sat down next to Erin. I introduced myself and explained that I was there to help. I told him he didn't have to talk about anything he didn't want to, but if he felt comfortable, I'd like to hear what he had to say. At first, Caleb didn't speak. He just sat there, picking at the hem of his shirt. But eventually, he started to talk, his voice barely above a whisper. "Jeff comes into my room," he said. "He says he wants to check on me, but sometimes he sits on my bed and touches me." My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. I asked him gentle, open-ended questions, letting him lead the conversation. Caleb described feeling scared and confused, how Jeff had told him it was their secret. When Caleb stopped talking, I thanked him for being brave and told him he'd done the right thing by telling his mom. After Caleb went back upstairs, I turned to Erin. She looked like she was on the verge of collapse. "I need to ask," I said carefully. "Have you ever noticed anything strange about Jeff's behavior?" Erin hesitated, her hands gripping the edge of the couch. "He's always been strict," she said slowly. "But I thought he was just trying to be a good stepdad. He works long hours, and when he's home, he can be quiet." But I didn't think much of it. I pressed further, asking if there had ever been signs, changes in Caleb's behavior, moments that felt off. Erin's face fell as she seemed to piece together things she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge before. "Caleb used to love playing outside," she said. "But lately, he's been staying in his room a lot, and he started wetting the bed again, even though he hadn't done that since he was 4. Her voice cracked. I thought he was just going through a phase. I told Erin that I would need to investigate further, starting with a forensic interview for Caleb at a child advocacy center. I also explained that we would have to find a way to question Jeff without tipping him off too soon. Erin nodded, though I could see the doubt in her eyes. "What if it's not true?" she asked, her voice shaking. "What if Caleb's mistaken?" "That's why we investigate," I said gently. "But we take every report seriously, especially when it comes from a child." That night, Erin packed a bag and took Caleb to stay at her sister's house. She didn't want to risk being in the same house as Jeff until we had answers. As I watched them drive away, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. I stayed in my car for a moment, staring at the house. It looked so normal, so quiet. But now I knew better. Whatever secrets Jeff was hiding, I was going to find them. The next day, Aaron brought Caleb to the Child Advocacy Center for a forensic interview. These interviews are carefully structured to minimize trauma while gathering vital information. Aaron sat in the waiting area, wringing her hands as Caleb disappeared behind the door with the forensic interviewer. The weight of the situation bore heavily on her, but she knew this was a necessary step. Behind the one-way mirror, I watched Caleb's interview alongside the advocacy team. Caleb sat on a small chair, his legs swinging nervously. The pastel-colored room was filled with toys, carefully designed to put children at ease. The interviewer began with light-hearted questions about Caleb's favorite activities, easing him into the conversation. Caleb spoke about his love of dinosaurs and drawing, his voice gaining a bit of confidence. But when the subject shifted toward Jeff, his demeanor changed. He shrank into his chair, clutching at the hem of his shirt. "Jeff's scary," he whispered. The interviewer gently encouraged him to explain. Caleb hesitated before describing how Jeff would come into his room at night, sit on his bed, and whisper things that didn't make sense. "He said I'm his special boy," Caleb murmured, his voice barely audible. The room behind the mirror fell silent. Those words carried a devastating weight. Caleb went on, describing how Jeff warned him to keep their special time a secret, threatening that something bad would happen if he told anyone. "He takes pictures," Caleb said hesitantly, "to keep secrets safe." My stomach tightened as I took notes. This wasn't just inappropriate behavior, it was criminal. After the interview, Caleb rejoined Aaron in the waiting area. He ran into her arms, and though she hugged him tightly, her trembling hands betrayed her anguish. I approached them, explaining the next steps carefully. Aaron listened, nodding as tears welled in her eyes. The advocacy team and I reviewed the evidence from Caleb's statements. It was clear that Jeff's actions were deliberate and predatory. The mention of photos raised even greater concerns, pointing to potential physical evidence that could corroborate Caleb's account. "We'll need to execute a search warrant," I said to Aaron later that day. She agreed without hesitation, providing the house key and alarm code, but choosing to stay at her sister's during the search. "I don't want to see any of it," she admitted, her voice trembling. The next afternoon, we arrived at the house while Jeff was at work. Its pristine facade, the neatly trimmed lawn, the spotless windows, was a stark contrast to what we suspected lurked inside. We entered cautiously, splitting into teams to cover different areas of the house. Jeff's office was meticulously organized, but a locked filing cabinet caught our attention. My partner, Harris, pried it open while I powered up the desktop computer. Inside the cabinet, we found business records, receipts, and tucked at the back an unmarked folder. The photos it contained made my blood run cold. Most appeared innocent at first glance. Caleb playing with toys or sitting on his bed. But the focus and framing were deeply unsettling. "Where's the camera?" Harris muttered. "In the master bedroom, we found it. A small digital camera hidden in Jeff's nightstand. Alongside it was a collection of notebooks filled with cryptic entries. One read, 'He needs me to protect him. No one else understands him like I do.' We bagged everything as evidence. The tech team later decrypted the camera's memory card, uncovering staged photos that were far from innocent. The clarity of the evidence solidified the case against Jeff. The following morning, we intercepted Jeff as he left work. "Jeffrey Morgan," I called, stepping forward. He turned, a mask of polite confusion on his face. "Yes, can I help you?" he asked. "You're under arrest for possession of child exploitation materials and endangering the welfare of a child. Turn around and place your hands behind your back," I instructed. Jeff froze, his face twisting from confusion to anger. "This is ridiculous. Caleb's lying. You have no proof." "We have all the proof we need," I said evenly as Harris cuffed him. "You can explain yourself to the judge." Jeff's protests continued as we escorted him to the squad car, but his words fell on deaf ears. We had the truth, and now we had the means to ensure justice for Caleb. Jeff's arrest was a whirlwind, but as the days passed, cracks began to appear in the case against him. For Aaron, The hope that justice would bring closure to her and Caleb started to feel as fragile as the peace they'd worked so hard to find. The evidence collected during the search, photos, journals, and the digital files, was at first glance damning. But as investigators dug deeper, the picture became less clear. Jeff's defense team, a group of high-powered attorneys hired by his employer, wasted no time scrutinizing every detail. The photos retrieved from Jeff's camera were ambiguous. While some were troubling, Caleb sitting stiffly on his bed, clearly uncomfortable. Others could be dismissed as innocent family moments. The prosecution argued that the framing and focus of the photos were consistent with grooming behavior, but the defense countered that they lacked context. These are merely snapshots of a blended family, Jeff's lead attorney said during a pretrial hearing. There is no criminal intent here. Then came the journals. The cryptic entries were unsettling, with phrases like, "He needs me to protect him, and no one else understands him like I do." But when pressed, Jeff claimed they were his reflections as a stepfather, trying to bond with a distant child. Without explicit admissions of wrongdoing, the notebooks were open to interpretation. The most damaging piece of evidence, the encrypted files from Jeff's computer, proved to be the weakest link. While the prosecution's tech team had managed to decrypt some of the files, many remained inaccessible. Those that were reviewed included mundane content, tax documents, work emails, and even video game screenshots, casting doubt on whether the encrypted files contained anything illicit at all. Forensic analysts examined Caleb's testimony, but Jeff's attorney skillfully highlighted inconsistencies. Caleb, only 7 years old, struggled to recount events in a linear or detailed manner. Under cross-examination, his statements appeared less reliable. The defense argued that his claims were the result of coaching or misunderstandings, rather than actual events. By the time Jeff's bail hearing came around, the case had lost much of its initial momentum. The judge, citing insufficient evidence and the defense's compelling arguments, granted Jeff's release pending further investigation. Erin was devastated. She had placed her faith in the system to protect her son, and now it felt as though that system had turned its back on them. The day Jeff was released, Erin called me, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and anger. "What do I do now?" she asked. "How do I keep Caleb safe?" I assured her that the investigation was still ongoing, and that we'd do everything in our power to uncover the truth. But even I felt the sting of doubt creeping in. The legal process, for all its rigor, was imperfect, and in cases like this, where so much hinged on subjective interpretation, the lines between guilt and innocence blurred dangerously. Jeff's return to the neighborhood was met with a mix of reactions. Some neighbors avoided him, unwilling to risk association. Others, swayed by his defense team's narrative, treated him as a man wrongfully accused. Jeff himself maintained an air of calm indignation, walking his dog and chatting with acquaintances as though nothing had happened. For Erin and Caleb, his presence was a constant source of tension. Caleb refused to play outside, retreating into his room whenever Jeff's car appeared in the driveway. Erin's nights were sleepless, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. She installed additional locks on the doors and kept Caleb close, but the psychological toll was evident. One afternoon, Caleb's therapist called to check in. "He's been withdrawing during sessions," she said. "We're working through it, but the uncertainty is weighing on him. He needs stability." Stability felt impossible with Jeff so close. Erin debated moving, but financial constraints and the desire to avoid disrupting Caleb's life further kept her rooted in place. She began documenting every interaction, every stray comment Jeff made, hoping to catch something, anything, that might strengthen the case. Months passed, and the case remained stalled. The DA's office pursued additional evidence, but with no new discoveries, the likelihood of formal charges diminished. Erin's once unshakable determination wavered, replaced by a deep exhaustion. She avoided eye contact with neighbors and limited her conversations to Caleb and a few trusted friends. One evening, Caleb approached Erin as she prepared dinner. "Mom, is Jeff gone forever?" he asked, his voice small. She knelt beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "Not yet, sweetheart," she admitted. "But we're going to make sure he can't hurt us anymore." Caleb nodded, his expression solemn. I don't want him to come back. Erin hugged him tightly, her resolve hardening. If the system couldn't protect them, she would find a way to ensure Caleb's safety. It wouldn't be easy, but for her son, she was willing to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For now, they clung to each other, finding strength in their bond as they navigated an uncertain future together. Jeff's release from custody marked a turning point for Erin. The justice system had failed her, leaving her to wrestle with the unrelenting fear of what Jeff might do next. For weeks, she watched as he resumed his life as though nothing had happened, his presence a constant reminder of the threat he posed to Caleb. Erin's sleepless nights were filled with planning. She knew she couldn't rely on the legal system to protect her son. Jeff's charm and careful manipulation had already sown seeds of doubt in the case, and Erin couldn't shake the fear that he might try to regain control of Caleb's life. Slowly, an idea began to form in her mind, a desperate, final solution to ensure Caleb's safety. One afternoon, while shopping at a local pharmacy, Erin purchased an over-the-counter medication containing a compound she had read about in her research. In small, precise doses, it could induce symptoms resembling a heart attack, leaving little trace. She paid in cash, her hands trembling as she tucked the bottle into her bag. The opportunity came a week later. Jeff had invited a few acquaintances over for a casual evening, complete with drinks and laughter that spilled into the quiet neighborhood. Erin knew his habits well. He always finished the night with a glass of whiskey, his favorite brand prominently displayed on the counter. As dusk fell, Erin made her move. She slipped into Jeff's backyard, while the group's laughter echoed through the house. Her heart pounded as she approached the open kitchen window, where Jeff's whiskey bottle sat, untouched for now. With a steady hand, she added the contents of the capsule she had prepared earlier, shaking the bottle gently to ensure it dissolved completely. Then, as silently as she had come, she disappeared into the shadows. The next morning, the news spread quickly. Jeff had been found dead in his bed, the half-empty whiskey bottle still on the nightstand. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as a heart attack, a tragedy that shocked the community but raised no suspicions. Erin's relief was tempered by the knowledge of what she had done, but she felt no regret. Caleb was safe, and that was all that mattered. In the weeks that followed, Erin and Caleb began to rebuild their lives. She sold the house and used the proceeds to move them to a new neighborhood, far from the memories of Jeff and his threats. Their new home was modest but cozy, nestled in a quiet community where Caleb could play outside without fear. Caleb thrived in the new environment. His laughter returned, filling their home with a lightness Erin hadn't heard in years. He made friends at school, joined the art club, and spent hours drawing pictures of dinosaurs and robots. Each new drawing felt like a step further from the shadow Jeff had cast over their lives. Erin, too, found solace in their fresh start. She took a job at a local nonprofit, helping families in crisis. The work gave her purpose and a way to channel the pain and guilt that lingered beneath the surface. Though she never spoke of what she had done, she carried the weight of it quietly, knowing she had acted out of love and desperation. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Caleb ran into the kitchen holding a drawing. "Look, Mom," he said excitedly. It was a picture of their new house, with Erin, Caleb, and their dog Max standing in front. Above them, Caleb had written, "Our safe place." Erin's throat tightened as she looked at the drawing. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," she said, pulling him into a hug. Caleb beamed. "We're happy here, right?" "We are," Erin replied, her voice steady. "We really are." That night, as Caleb slept peacefully in his room, Erin sat on the porch with a cup of tea, staring at the stars. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of calm. The darkness that had loomed over their lives was gone, replaced by the quiet promise of a better future. Erin knew their journey wasn't over. There would be challenges ahead, moments when the past threatened to resurface. But as she listened to the soft hum of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves, she felt hope. Caleb was safe, and they were free to build a life filled with love and laughter, a life where fear no longer had a place. As the months turned into years, Erin and Caleb continued to heal. They celebrated milestones together, From Caleb's first art competition to adopting a second rescue dog that Caleb named Buddy. Their family wasn't conventional, but it was theirs, and it was filled with love. On the 2-year anniversary of their move, Aaron and Caleb returned to the park where they'd first flown a kite in their new neighborhood. This time, they brought both Max and Buddy, along with a picnic basket filled with Caleb's favorite snacks. As they sat on the grass, watching the dogs play and the sun dip below the horizon, Caleb leaned against his mom and sighed contentedly. "I think we're really happy now," he said, his voice soft but certain. Aaron kissed the top of his head. "We are, sweetheart. We really are." In that moment, Aaron let herself believe it. The road to happiness had been long and filled with darkness, but they'd found their way to the light. And for the first time in a long time, Aaron felt at peace.